You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. In this episode, I'm in discussion with John Crowder, Head of Digital Experience at Journey Further. With over 9 years in the conversion world, John has heard most of the reasons as to why companies may be reluctant to embark on a program of testing. But today, we investigate whether the results obtained are really worth the effort. John, there's varying figures out there from many sources around the adoption of experimentation, and I know it's very difficult to quantify. But one of the stats I came for was from lead generation specialist Adoric, suggesting that 77% of companies are running some sort of experimentation on their sites. But according to another agency, Invesp, only 58% are using experimentation for conversion rate optimization. So in our earlier discussions, you said that a question you hear a lot is, why bother with CRO or testing or experimentation? So how do you answer it?
Great question to start with. So why bother in its most simple form is because it's effective, right, at doing what you want it to do, which is it proves out changes. It's the same methodology we use to understand if seatbelts work, right, or if pharmaceuticals work. It's the same base methodology of designing an experiment to see if the thing that you have introduced that is new has had the intended effect and the size of that effect. And it can be very tempting and very common to sort of go into scientific methodology. I don't really want to do that too much here. But the reason that anyone should do it, the reason that anyone should bother with implementing, a robust system around running experiments, measuring experiments, and not just spinning the wheel each time that they want to grow and change and add products to their environment. The reason to do that is because it lets you know whether you had the intended effect or not. And then once you know that, your next action can be informed by it.
Okay, great analogy, by the way. I thought that was really, really good and very effective. And we are in the business of testing and experimentation, so we kind of know the benefits and we sing that on our websites, etc., etc. But a lot of the things I would say is the nitty-gritty of that is that there are a number of what I would describe as areas of concern, and I use concern in a very small way, is things like designing proper experiments is hard. I mean, it's What do you test? How do you know what to test? Because obviously the people inside the business might say, we're going to do this. And you might think, well, I'm going to test that. But finding out how to test that when you're starting out or when you're a little bit into things can be quite challenging. So how do you go about creating a methodology that makes that better?
So it is definitely beneficial to have a well put together and comprehensive structure. But the advice I'm going to give everyone, if you're not testing and you want to begin testing, is to bring on board a testing, and for websites, we're talking about mostly websites and apps, here is the environment, is to bring on board a testing platform and start. That is by far the best first step that you can take. Without doing that, you can spend weeks, months deciding, that you need X, Y, and Z, getting all of that put in place, and you'll lose time. You may not even do it. You may have other priorities come up. I actually think that one of the real benefits of having experimentation in place, at least the ability to experiment, the ability to test a change, is that you move from this environment of having to put forward comprehensive business cases for every change into an area where the experiment itself is the business case, which is much, much more effective. Firstly, because if you don't have any actual data and you're trying to find corollary data to make a business case, you're already on the back foot. You're already using data that may not work. Whereas you can actually do a one-for-one test of that idea, and then that is your use case, that is your business case that you can then take to the company. And I've seen multiple occasions where there are ideas which are maybe deemed too small to build a business case for, or inconsequential. And so businesses that would normally have just made a decision, they would have made a judgment call at that point. They would have said either, we're just not going to do this, we don't think it's a big enough deal. It's just leaving that on the cutting room floor, right? Mm-hmm. Or the alternative is, we are going to do this, and we're just going to put it into a backlog, and it's going to be built, and we're going to be releasing it. And I've seen both outcomes happen when we test things that were not going to be tested. And what I mean by that is, I've seen small changes that are inconsequential but need to be done go live and tank conversion rates, tank purchases. And I have also seen things that people would not have bothered with, or things that, you know, everyone sort of can generally agree might be a good idea but no one can actually get over the line, that has driven conversion rate enormously. And it's only because they had a testing capability that was willing and able to build those as experiments and then measure them, that those changes went in and then were understood to be as valuable as they are.
So I think we're all believers in testing and experimentation, but actually some of the challenges that people will face is when they're in a business that's been doing things for, say, 10 years, they've got a hierarchy of people above them, trying to implement testing when the default answer is, if we've always done it like this, must be really challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And you can find any number of quotes from respected business leaders saying that we've always done this way is an awful mindset for growth, right? But one of the real valuable points is, it's not a particular direction change, in the sense that businesses didn't really have enough data to support a decision-making process, so they were using what they had previously and then just making a judgment call with some sort of internal gauge being used for risk, right? So they're looking at that and they're thinking, like, should we change this USP that we use to advertise this product on, or should we launch a new product aimed at this need we think we've identified? And it's still there, it's just being done organically, and it's not being done in a structured scientific way. And the downside to not doing it in a structured scientific way is a few things. Firstly, it is usually not repeatable, so good scientific experiment design should indicate that you should be able to reproduce the experiment multiple times and get the same outcome. And if you can do that, you've got much closer to understanding whether the thing that you changed was the reason that you got that outcome or not. So it's applying those methodologies to something that has previously been quite rooted in gut feel and sort of senior decision making. And I appreciate, like, that is a huge, mostly social change within a business, because it does rely on people, particularly if you've been in the workforce for like 20, 30, 40 years. Experimentation has come along, at least the ability to experiment. I mean, digital is new, right? That still. But the ability to experiment within this environment at that scale is relatively, you know, within the last 10 years, a capability that's come along. And so what you were doing at the start of your career may not be the same way that you do it at the end of your career, and you're probably doing it for the same reasons, but it's a cultural and social change within a business, because you might not be the shot caller anymore, right? That's I think the anxiety that might sit at the centre of it, which is, you previously could, as long as you trusted your own direction, you could previously set that direction and drive through it. Whereas if you examine every decision scientifically, you may change direction, and the place you end up may not be the place you set that direction when you started. And I appreciate that comes with that requires a different mindset. You have to You have to be intentional in understanding that you may change direction.
So I'm going to be sounding very negative about this, but I'm really playing devil's advocate because I want us to highlight what those challenges could be, almost on a list-by-list basis, and we've covered a few of them just now. But so one of the things is, well, how do you know if you've got enough volume for testing?
I mean, there are multiple calculators on the web that you can plug your data into that will tell you how confident you can be in a result. But it's worth saying at this point, what I'm not going to do right now is give you a number. Because there really isn't a point where you would just say it's not worth it, it's not worth testing, we're just going to pull the lever and hope for the best. Because if you have so few people in an audience, if you have such low traffic that it's not sort of valid to run any experiment, you would probably just have few enough customers that you could be talking to them directly, and actually that would be fine. Right, you could literally, if you run a shop and you've got 10 customers, talk to all 10 of them, know them intimately, respond to them in that way. It's a different business. But for most digital businesses that have reached any kind of scale, you do have enough traffic to test. You may not be as accurate as an Amazon or Google, but you will have a way to reduce the amount of risk around every decision you make, to be more confident in decisions that you are making. That will be there, and you may accept like lower confidence bounds, like instead of reaching a statistical significance boundary of 95%, you might hit 80%, right? And that's something that you could do with lower traffic. You might choose a different statistical model.
Yeah.
You might choose like a sequential statistical model because that's better suited for lower amounts of traffic and for answering things sooner. But there really isn't a period where the alternative should just be, no, don't bother. Unless you have so few like customers that you could talk to them personally.
You used a phrase a short while ago called scientific experiments. Now, a lot of that conjures up all sorts of men in white coats with all sorts of analytic tools and things like that to make this work. And therefore, in the mind of the financial controller perhaps, or the marketing director, that would equal cost. Even though it may not equal a lot of cost, it equals cost. So do you think there is a justification in ROI as part of that we should do it?
Potentially, although the cost of being wrong and making a decision is so much higher. So if you make a decision that erodes your conversion rate by 0.5%, that's so much more expensive than any conversion program would have been for a lot of brands. To the point where it's not uncommon for you remember a lot of the things that you would change, the things you would test on a website would be ongoing, perpetual growth levers, right? So whether that's like you're selling a product and you find a better way to position that product, or you make your product page more usable, right? People can find information easier than they did before, and that leads them to buy at a higher rate, that kind of stuff. That's not just happening for the duration of the experiment. Once you've proven that change drives value and you make that change to your website, that continues to drive value for a year, beyond a year, however long that lasts for. And that alone can make it the case that a single experiment can pay for an experimentation program multiple times over. It's even the case where an experiment program that stops harmful changes from going live can pay for an experiment program multiple times over. Like the ROI on experimentation is enormous.
Yeah, because some of the things, not every test is going to be positive. Some are going to show negativity, if you like. But it's better that that's being tested and not implemented across the site-wide than actually doing it. So there is a cost saving in, as you say, being able to stop negative changes happening.
For sure. And also, if you just imagine an environment where experimentation is taking place within a website, and then unplug experimentation from that entire workflow, those changes are still going out. The difference is you don't know if they're harmful until they've hurt you.
That's true. The other one that we hear a lot is that implementing experimentation slows website development and stifles creativity and spontaneity, I'd add as well. How do you answer that one?
In my experience, that is not true. The opposite is true. The well-run experimentation programs that have a decent level of resource and that have a solid structure behind them lead to more changes going through a website than would have gone through in a traditional waterfall planning methodology. And therefore, you actually make many more changes, and those changes deliver concrete value when you experiment. So there is an argument to say that yes, you are adding a process, because if you hadn't tested anything, you would just put this change live and move on to the next one. But in experience, I have seen that not to be the case, because you end up testing a lot more things. You end up spending less of your time on admin and selling in changes and making business cases for things and trying to convince people of a change before it goes live and that sort of thing. And that leads to ultimately more change, but more specifically and more importantly, more positive performing change for a website. Anyone can deliver 100 things that don't work. We could just draw up a big list. We could ask GPT to write it for us.
We'll cover AI in a short while.
Yeah, but actually the important thing is that a business should have confidence that the changes it's making year on year on year with the resource it has is growing that business, is growing the performance of those products. And experimentation is a way to validate and guarantee that.
Okay, so now we've convinced the powers that be that we're going to start testing. But I think a phrase that you've used a couple of times when I've heard you in the past is talking about doing testing versus testing well, or building a culture of testing. Can you explain what the evolution of testing is from, say, for instance, you've been doing your first couple of tests and they've proved to be beneficial?
For sure. So when you start having the capacity to test, quite a lot of what happens, unless the people involved have sort of previous experience in setting up testing programs and running them, quite a lot of what happens initially is, firstly, you're guided by the tool in terms of what experiments you create. So if you've got a visual editor, quite a lot of people load that visual editor up, go look at their homepage, go, oh, we could change this, we could change that. It's the capability of the tool that's determining the first experiments you're likely to run. There's also, people tend to play it really, really safe, and they're like, okay, well, maybe we're going to run this test for 3-4 months on the homepage, and then maybe we'll think about running another one, but I want to keep an eye on this one. So they're putting it on their homepage, they're logging in every day, they're doing that kind of stuff. And they're usually running like one test at a time across their whole website and things to that nature. But it is almost all dictated by the fact that this is a new tool and they are learning how to use it and how it feels. And that is guiding that testing program. Then over time, what you actually need to do when you are building an effective testing program is be guided by the user and their motivations and their needs. And usually that means interrogating those users' motivations and needs. So eventually you will transition from a place of, I have a testing tool, it is open, what tests can I build in it? You move to a place of, I need to find a way to talk to our users somehow, be that through mediums like surveys or user research, or we have our customer service teams feedback on things people have struggled with, or there's any number of ways you can get to that information. It can even be from the viewing of analytics, right? Observation of customer behaviour, that kind of stuff. And then from that observation, from that research aspect, you build out a a model of how customers behave, or how, even when you get more refined, how segments of customers behave, what their motivations are for buying that product. So if it's a beauty product or a healthcare product or something like that, the more you learn about that customer, you may learn they're not buying it for themselves, they're buying it for someone else, or they're buying it for a very specific need, or they're the thing that likely brought them to here to purchase was seeing this information or having this motivation. Once you understand that, you can design a user experience for that person, and you can test that user experience. But the difference is the idea did not come from the tool and what the tool can do. The idea came from the user. So you've identified a user need, and then you're using that tool to build it and understand it better. And that's when you're really starting to mature in that experimentation program. Beyond that, there is a step even further, which is understanding that individual experiments, although they're important, are not a full experimentation program. A full experimentation program needs to feed back into itself and build on itself. The idea being that when you test one concept and you have a winning test, that is not how your website is now going to be for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I was going to cover that off, yes.
Yeah, you dive back into that concept. You want to try and understand what behaviour changed in the experiment. You got the outcome you wanted, in the sense that, you know, you got more purchases, for example. But then you want to understand, like, presenting the information in that way, or whatever the test design was, that changed behaviour. How did it change behaviour? Could we go even further with that idea to change behaviour to a greater degree? Can we apply that learning elsewhere? Can we run a similar experiment? Can we run a more ambitious experiment using this as the basis to run that experiment? Once you've done that, you're now iterating. You're doing iterative product development through a medium of experimentation, and that is when you're reaching that level of maturity. And then there's levels beyond that. A lot of businesses will probably not reach that, at least not unless they intentionally throw a lot of money behind it. Your Booking.com, your Spotify, your places that are known for being experimenters, they will get there because that's about how you make product design and development an always-on tested approach, rather than having to intentionally think about building an experiment each time you want to test an idea. But for most businesses, they are reaching what I would call excellence when they have a experimentation program that leads to a deeper understanding of their customer, that then feeds back both into the design of the website itself, but into every other part of the business where that learning and that knowledge could make an improvement, be that from logistics, packaging, marketing. All of those sorts of things can benefit from knowing their customer and their motivations better.
That was a very good soliloquy of the reasons why. I think we're all caught up in the day-to-day, and if you like, we're drinking the Kool-Aid, as the Americans would say in the 90s. I think from the perspective of being able to look at it and saying, actually, the facts speak for themselves, but you've got to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. It's really got to be able to say, okay, the benefits are, and you've explained those benefits as a mature, or doing testing well, as being a well-oiled machine, and it's going to continue to deliver and continue to bring value into the business. One of the questions that we've kind of covered off in early questions is, does experimentation only seem to fit within the larger organisations? And the reason why I've asked that question now is that I'm sure there's people going through their head thinking, we ought to do CRO of some sort of experimentation. I know, AI is the answer. So I'll just pop it into ChatGPT and hey presto, all my content will be wonderful. I'm sure you have a view on that. What's your thoughts?
I do. That is using AI to bypass some of the more difficult parts of the process, but you also bypass any value that can provide, right? So the key part is to understand your user, your customer, and their motivations as well as you can, and to speak to those motivations, to deliver products that are able to answer their needs and their motivations, and therefore drive performance in that way. If you go to AI to ask this question, first of all, AI does not have enough context, even if you give it a load of context. Even if you go in and say, we are a plant hire company in the Midlands. We hire out plant material for people who want to do building at home, and we want ideas to improve our website. It will give you answers, but it can only give you the most generic median answers possible. And also, it can only speak to sort of generalized concepts in your industry. And the downside to that is that you might as well have just Googled what experiments do other people run and use that. You didn't need AI to do this for you. Right? These lists have existed before AI. But you're not going to get close to your actual customer, to your end user, and understand their motivations better, and use that to build you A/B tests, or use that to give you ideas for A/B tests. I've seen early prototypes of AI tools that claim they can build experiments for you, but they have build A/B tests on your site, but they have similar problems, right? They produce something that usually doesn't fit well within the design of the site, and also just doesn't understand the core motivation of the user to drive change. So you're running into a problem that is not in how you use AI, is at the heart of AI, which is that it's designed to speak to medians before speak to specifics, and that's going to be a challenge you run into again and again and again with AI if you're using it for ideation.
It's interesting because Gartner, that well-known company out there in the US, suggests that next year 30% of companies are likely to be using AI to improve their testing process, as opposed to what was 5% in 2021. But one of the things that I think is on the horizon, I'm not sure if it is the case, I've just heard rumours, that Google will start penalising AI-generated content. Have you heard any of that?
I'd be very surprised if they did do that. I know Google's got a bit of an existential crisis going on at the moment, in the sense that they are one of the biggest search provider. Well, they are the biggest search provider in the world, and they want to move to a less gameable system for how they should rank content. And so they're trying to understand in data terms the best analog for this content was useful, this content was informative, this content drove user behavior, right? And they're trying to figure that out in data terms. So they have that as a core business problem that Google have to go through. They are also, like any company their size in tech, investing heavily in AI themselves. Yeah. So they have to make those two ends meet, right? In that if you are producing high quality content, then Google should rank you. Now the question is, can AI produce meaningful high quality content because it is designed to speak to the most generalized way of delivering information, and also it has its own quirks with how it writes and how it produces images and things like that. I would say that it's likely that without any sort of major development in either the AI models that they're able to put together or ranking, that it would downweight AI content naturally, because whatever data it's using to measure it would understand that users don't respond as well to it, and also there's a massive surplus of this information because it's so low cost to produce for the end user, that it's just out there, sat on the web and constantly growing, and therefore it's all competing with itself and all downweighting itself, allowing higher quality, human produced content to rise to the top. I think that's likely, but at the same time they do have an AI product that they would like to sell, so whether that has any impact on how they choose to rank or not is will be an interesting thing to study. I have seen a lot of studies showing that consumers do not respond particularly positively when they believe content to be AI produced, and if that holds true and that influences user behavior, then any metric being used to understand if this content was informative or useful will automatically downrank AI stuff anyway. may not even know it's AI at the time, but it will downrank it because it's perceived by the user to not be useful, and therefore they don't read it, they don't scroll, they don't click on things on the page, they bounce more, that kind of stuff.
I think it's one of those areas that it's watch this space, see how it's going to develop over the next 2 or 3 years, because it's definitely a conversational topic where everybody's thinking, well, do I need to invest in a content writer? Do I spend more money actually having a human being, or can AI, or will AI be able to do it for me? But as
AI
you say,
as a product has had greater levels of investment than any other product in human history. So there are big bets that need to be paid off. So how they make those pay off will be something to watch.
Yeah, I should think so. John, as we come to the end of this conversation, I'd just like to finish with one stat, which I think lots of people seem to miss in the whole CRO process, which is basically everybody saying, okay, we're going to do this, or we're going to tweak this or tweak that. But HubSpot came out, I think it was last year, with a statistic that said visitors who have a good experience on your website are more likely to return. In fact, 88% of users are less likely to return after a bad experience. So it's not just about, is it converting, but are you losing customers as well? And I think that's one of the elements. It's not just building excitement, as somebody described it in previous conversations, but it's actually being able to say, I need to maintain my customers' interest in what I'm doing. Even though they don't buy today, I want them to come back. And a lot of the CRO, I think, is all about incremental gains as opposed to managing the losses. Would you agree?
Sort of. It often, the business case is easy to make for incremental gains, and I think that leads to a lot of why experiments point at that, right? Sell more things, make more money, pays for itself and then some, right? It's a really easy thing to make. Yeah. Opportunity cost is and always has been hard to measure, and therefore doesn't get the level of attention and therefore funding that it perhaps should. User experience is also hard to measure in the sense that the metrics behind them are either cumbersome or woolly, and that in itself can be a problem. Anyone who has worked on changing or improving NPS scores will know that pain. Yes. So, there is a just direct material problem there, which is that money in the bank is very measurable.
Yes.
And money that may hit the bank much later is harder to measure. Yeah. And therefore they get different amounts of attention. That said, experimentation is a great way to change metrics, regardless of what those metrics are, provided you can measure them. So when I worked, previous to working at Journey Further, I worked for Sky, and what I was doing at Sky was trying to improve the success outcomes of our help centre on sky.com. So were people more able to find solutions to broadband problems? And then we measured, did they solve that problem? Because we asked that user, did this solve your problem? And so we can use that as a metric. It wasn't directly linked to people subscribing to Sky in the sense that this wasn't a purchase that happened. But Sky knew that a user is much, much, much more likely to churn if they have a prolonged service outage or issue that they can't solve. Yeah. And therefore, being able to influence and change solutions online has led to the outcome that they wanted, which is lower churn rates when you drive that performance through. Also saves the business money in the sense that most of the things that aren't solved online will end up in a contact centre at some point, and that costs money. And then there are other advantages over and above that. So being able to get interventions to customers at any time of day when call centres are closed has led Sky to be the top of Ofcom complaints handling rankings for years. Okay. So you see those metrics running through, but I'm not, to be clear, I'm not taking whole credit for that. I left 5 years ago, so but I did do some of it. Yeah, so you can drive change that is not just purchases and not just conversion rates in that sense. You can build an experimentation program around any metric you're trying to influence and change. One of the beauties of the scientific method that you're applying it to is it's not particularly wedded to conversion directly. It's something that can be turned to any goal. what I would say is, for the businesses who want to do that, you probably do need to understand what the metric you're trying to influence is and how it behaves, and then what can actually be measured in user visit or session. And then once you understand those, absolutely go for it. Use that as a metric and start driving it.
John, thank you very much for your time. It's been, as I would always say, an interesting topic, and one that I'm sure people are visiting day after day, week after week. As far as the AI is concerned, I think let's watch this space. I think it is going to be an interesting few years ahead of us with regard to how websites interact with AI, if nothing else. But for now, thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thank you very much.